The steward assigned to escort me from the docking collar to the galley did not speak for the first 4 minutes. He walked quickly, the kind of pace designed to discourage conversation, and I kept up without comment because I have been keeping up without comment for 22 years and I know what that walk means. It means, you are not supposed to be here. It means, someone above my pay grade added you to the manifest and I am dealing with it. When we reached the galley hatch he said, in the flat, translated cadence of someone who has rehearsed a sentence they find distasteful, your designation is ceremonial complement. Non-essential. No operational role is anticipated. He paused in case I wanted to argue. I did not argue. I said thank you and went inside and started on my stock. The Kethsolan was a Calaran Sovereignty diplomatic cruiser, 340 meters of polished pale silver hull plating, gill-vented atmospheric processes running a closed recycling loop, a summit delegation of 47, and a galley that smelled like a mineral processing facility. Calaran synthesized nutrition is efficient. It is not food. It comes in sealed compression, blocks the color of old bone, and it dissolves in the mouth without committing to any particular flavor. The 47 members of the delegation ate it 3 times a day and showed no signs of suffering, which tells you something about what suffering means to them. I had brought my own provisions in a sealed transport crate, dried legumes, fermented grain paste, dried mushrooms, bone fragments from 3 species, a half kilo of cured vegetables, and 2 bottles of acidulated whey from a small producer in the northern colonies. It is not a glamorous kit. It is what you pack when you know you will be somewhere for 9 days and you intend to eat. I started the reduction on the first afternoon, low heat, the kind of patient simmer that requires nothing from you except that you don't rush it. The second steward found me at the stove about 6 hours in. He was younger than the first, smooth carapaced across the shoulders, copper ranking bands at the wrists, junior protocol staff, the sort who gets sent to deal with problems his senior doesn't want to look at. He stood in the galley hatch for a moment assessing the situation. Then he said, also through the translation band, that substance produces a detectable volatile compound profile. It is registering on the ship's atmospheric sensors as an anomaly. I said, it's stock. He said, it is not a recognized compound class. I said, it's been cooking for 6 hours. It'll be cooking for another 60. It'll smell less interesting once the volatiles cook off. I did not explain further. He filed a report. I know this because 3 hours later a third member of the delegation came to look at my pot, older, senior carapace markings, the kind of officer who does not normally visit the galley, and looked at it for a long time without touching it, the way you look at something you have decided is beneath further inquiry, and then he left. I turned the heat down a fraction and went back to reading. On day 2, a formal written request arrived through the translation system. It was courteous and precisely worded, as Calaran communications tend to be, and it asked whether my non-registered organic preparation could be relocated to a sealed external storage unit for the remainder of the transit, citing atmospheric integrity protocols. I wrote back, also courteous, also precise, noting that the preparation required active low heat maintenance to remain viable and that sealed external storage ran at 4 degrees, which would kill it within the hour. I attached the relevant section of the Kethsolan's own galley equipment specification, which I had read on the first evening, and noted that the stove I was using was rated for exactly this class of extended low-heat cooking. I did not hear back. On day 3, a different junior steward walked past the galley hatch twice without stopping, looked at the pot both times, and kept walking. I assumed this constituted a final inspection. I added the first bottle of whey and reduced the heat another notch. The summit convened on the morning of day 4 in the Orandas Crossing Station's central mediation chamber, a sealed environment hall with its own atmospheric processing node drawing from the station's main recycler loop. 47 Calaran delegates, their counterpart Soreth Falcon block of 39, for human observers filed under ceremonial complement, no operational role anticipated. I had been on the station for 2 hours. I had brought the reduction in a sealed carry pot because I intended to finish it properly and see what happened if I added the acidulated whey at the end. The cascade started at hour 2 of the first session. I know this because I was in the observer gallery behind the mediation floor, a narrow elevated deck where ceremonial complements are stationed during proceedings so that their presence can be noted for the record and then forgotten, and I watched the atmospheric display panel at the end of the gallery tick from green to amber over the course of about 20 minutes, while the delegates below discussed boundary protocols, and I thought, there it is. The recycler loop on a sealed environment station node is a closed system. It processes all atmospheric compounds in the space and cycles them back. Caloran synthesized nutrition blocks contain a class of compressed protein analog compound that, in an open environment, disperses and degrades cleanly. In a closed-loop recycler running at summit density, 47 delegates plus 39 counterparts plus equipment plus thermal load, they do not degrade. They accumulate. They cross-react. The recycler starts reading the accumulation as a contaminant and begins a purge protocol. The purge protocol, when triggered in a sealed summit environment, locks the atmospheric management system. I had a rough idea this might happen because I had read the station's environmental specifications in the transit manifest, as one does when one has 9 days on a diplomatic cruiser and nothing else to read. I had not mentioned this to anyone because no one had asked. The amber ticked to orange at hour 3. Below, the delegation leads were presenting boundary maps. Around me, the 3 other human ceremonial complements were taking notes. I picked up my carry pot, which I had set under my chair because the galley was 2 decks below, and I walked quietly down the observer gallery stairs. I was back in the galley when the first alarm sounded. The lockdown was orderly, as far as lockdowns on sealed diplomatic station nodes go. The atmospheric management system flagged the accumulation, initiated the purge sequence, determined that the purge compounds would interact with the existing accumulation, and lock the loop rather than risk dispersing the cascade into the mediation chamber. This is the correct thing to do. It is also the thing that leaves 47 delegates, 39 counterparts, and 4 ceremonial complements sharing an atmospheric recycler that is no longer recycling. The Caloran delegation's senior nutrition engineer was at the atmospheric management console in 8 minutes. She was very good. I watched her work through the display panel I had pulled up on the galley's secondary monitor, which is not normally used for anything but food service scheduling but which is, in fact, wired to the station's management feed. She ran 4 diagnostic sequences, identified the compound class correctly, determined that the purge protocol required a neutralizing organic buffer to complete without triggering secondary accumulation, and then spent 11 minutes searching the station's certified compound registry for an organic buffer of sufficient volume and appropriate pH range. There was not one. The station's food stores were all synthesized. The delegation's provisions were all synthesized. The emergency chemical stores were inorganic. The atmospheric management system, locked in its purge hold, waited patiently for something it could use. The Sorithvelkan block's environmental officer tried next. Different approach, same problem. They had a class of fermented dietary supplement in their provisions, but the batch size was wrong by 2 orders of magnitude and the pH was 30% outside the range the system required. The nutrition engineer ran the numbers in about 4 minutes and shook her head without speaking. 2 Sorith delegates produced what appeared to be emergency ration options, which were passed between them with increasing urgency and then set down. A station technician checked 3 storage compartments and reported back in a flat voice. The mediation chamber's atmospheric readings sat at orange and held there, and the room on the display, visible from the galley monitor, had gone very still, the way rooms go still when everyone in them has understood the shape of the problem and is waiting for someone else to solve it. I had been simmering for 81 hours at that point. The reduction was somewhere around 1.5 liters, dark, dense, slightly acidic from the way, a pH that I could estimate within about half a unit based on the smell and the color and the way it moved in the pot. I had done this enough times to know what I had. I sat on the galley counter and drank my tea and waited, because there is a particular kind of moment where the right thing is to let the other people arrive at the same conclusion you have already arrived at, without assistance. Delegation lead Kethorvan came to the galley door at the 47-minute mark. He had sent an aide first, a senior protocol officer I recognized from the transit, one of the staff who had walked past my galley hatch on day 3. The aide stood in the doorway and explained, carefully, that the atmospheric management system had identified a possible organic buffer compound in the station's inventory and that the delegation wished to discuss access. He said, discuss access, the way someone says a phrase they have been told to say in preference to a more direct phrase. I said that the delegation could discuss access with me directly, and that I was happy to wait. The aide left. I poured the last of the tea. He was the 3rd most senior member of the Caloran Sovereignty Diplomatic Corps, which meant he was not the sort of person who visited galleys. He stood in the doorway in full formal carapace markings, gill vents cycling at the elevated rate I had learned to associate with what passes for urgency in his species, and he looked at me on the counter and at the pot on the stove. He said, through the translation band, the atmospheric management system requires an organic buffer compound. Our engineer has identified that your current preparation, a pause, the kind that means someone is being careful, may qualify. I said, it does. He said, We require access to it. I said, I understand. I set down my tea. Before we discuss access, I need you to do something for me. There was a silence. Gilvents cycling. State the requirement. I reached into my jacket pocket and produced a single sheet of paper. Actual paper. I carry a small pad. It has been useful in the past, and a pen. My designation in the manifest is ceremonial complement. No operational role anticipated. I set the paper on the counter beside me. I need that changed. In writing. Signed. The silence lasted somewhat longer this time. Below us, somewhere in the station's atmospheric systems, the recycler loop was holding. It would hold for approximately another 90 minutes before the accumulation reached the threshold where the purge sequence could no longer be safely delayed, at which point the mediation chamber's emergency ventilation would open and 46 years of Kalansaroth boundary negotiation would be suspended pending an environmental incident review. I was aware of this. I was reasonably certain Kethorvan was aware of this. I finished my tea. He wrote on the paper. He signed it. He handed it back to me. I read it in full before I folded it and put it in my pocket, because I have done this before and the reclassification needs to say what it needs to say. What followed took about 40 minutes. The reduction goes in slowly. You introduce it to the recycler's buffer intake at the rate the system can process it, which I knew from the flow specifications in the same transit manifest I had read on the transit over, and which the nutrition engineer helped me with because she is very competent, and once she understood what I was doing she moved quickly. The purge sequence completed. The loop cleared. The atmospheric display walked back from orange to amber to yellow to green over the course of about 25 minutes, and I stood at the recycler intake with a carry pot and added the last of the reduction in 3 careful additions, and the system accepted it, and the lockdown lifted. The mediation chamber atmospheric readings returned to nominal. The summit reconvened 4 hours later. I cleaned the pot. I started a new batch because I still had provisions and 6 days left on the assignment, and there is no particular reason to stop making stock just because the immediate situation has resolved. Kethorvan came back to the galley once more, that evening. He stood in the hatch for a moment. I did not look up from the stove. He said, in the careful translated cadence, the delegation acknowledges the operational contribution. I said, I know. He started to say something else. Then he didn't. His gilvents settled back to resting rate. He left. The new reduction came together nicely by morning. No anomalous volatile profile.
No atmospheric flags.
It smelled, as it always does, like something that has been tended patiently for a long time by someone who knew what they were doing. I suppose that was the point.